All righty. Hey guys, remember my teaching style is kind of a pinball. I want to introduce you to things, we need to develop things, we need to master things, and not all of those things happen at the same time. I'd rather introduce you to things that apply to the other things, introduce it, stay ahead of the game, lead the duck, lead the player, lead the shot. So today, what I'm going to start off with is on your test, in terms of position and motion questions, it's all going to be sagittal plane stuff. In terms of joints, it's all going to be joints that can flex and extend, because we need to practice this before we go off into horizontal abduction. Let's make sure we're riding on the with the training wheels on before we bounce them off, and then we go faster and faster. Okay. And so I literally have the joints that you are accountable for on page 29. On page 29. So you go to your materials, look on page 29, your cervical, your trunk, your shoulder, your elbow, your wrist, your hip, and your knee. Now, the first thing I want to get to is what are we working towards? And that's for to not fall for illusionary traps. What is this motion called? A shrug. Now, there's nowhere in the literature where it says a shrug is a motion. That's an exercise that's kind of gotten into the lexicon. Are my shoulders moving? See, our primitive brains that want to see linear, we're like, well, yeah, the shoulder's going up and down. There's motion at the shoulder. And my cynicism is like, absolutely. There's also my elbow going up and down. Why don't we call those elbow shrugs? My wrist is going up and down. Next time you're in the weight room with your friend, mess with them and say, hey, can I get in a set of these wrist shrugs? They're going up and down too. The shoulder is literally just going up and down with the socket that makes up the scapula bone. So it's really the scapula that's going up and down, and the shoulder's just attached to it, so it's going along for the ride. The elbow's attached to it, it's going along for the ride. The wrist is attached to it, it goes along for the ride. But we get these things put in our heads at an early age, shoulder shrugs, and we have no choice but to think that shoulder motion. What can the shoulder do? I'm going to teach you. It can flex, it can extend, it can abduct, it can adduct, it can internally and externally rotate, it can horizontal AB and AD and adduct, and nowhere in that conversation does it say, just an example, that our brains want to give linearity credit for things. Okay? So, practice from yesterday. This is won an art contest when I was in elementary school. Very proud of it. I was the only contestant, but I still took home that ribbon with pride. This is how Dr. George used to draw his stick figures with the beak so that you know where you're facing. Guys, stick figures could be a great tool for you. Stick figures on cards where you're doing here to here. You can do practice stick figures. You can draw position changes. It's a great way to practice your motion, okay? So start, finish. I went from anatomical, arm at my side, to flexed. The only way that can happen is if I had shoulder flexion. True? I'm more in feet here. There to there. Am I in the same position? Am I more in the fetal or less in the fetal compared to this one? More in the fetal or less in the fetal? Less. So how did I have to travel down the sagittal road? I had to have extension. However, my position, where am I at relative to anatomical? I am still flexed. I need you to understand that. Flexion, extension, anatomical position, flexed. We can even do a goniometer, flexed at 90. Fine. Extension, but I'm still flexed. Extension, from to. Motion is changing position. Extension, Now my position is extended. I'm in an extended position. I'm further away from fetal than I was when I was here. Extension and extended. Now, something that has an extended position, it's not based off of fetal position, and anatomical position is how we describe motion. Traveling to fetal, traveling away from fetal. Flexed and extended is based off of anatomical position, meaning I am in an extended position because I have a reference point to it. Is Lafayette east or west? Is Lafayette east or west? Is Lafayette east or west? I'm going to hold you here. We're going to make it uncomfortable. I'm going to do something Dr. Madsen used to fuss at me. Give them time. Make them uncomfortable. Is Lafayette east or west? Yes! Hail the conquering hero. From what? Absolutely. From what? Lafayette can be east of Crowley, or it could be west of Breaux Bridge. We have to have a reference. And our reference to where are you at is anatomical position. I am flexed. Compared to what? Anatomical. I am extended. Compared to what? Anatomical. Lafayette is east. Compared to what? Crowley. Lafayette is west. Compared to what? It's a comparative thing. Now, in this analogy, Lafayette is going to be anatomical. So now I could say Crowley is west of Lafayette. Breaux Bridge is east of Lafayette. But we have to have some comparison to make it make sense. A little bit. Yeah, the good thing about stick figures is you don't have to be a great artist. You just need sticks. Okay. All right. So these are the joints you're going to be accountable for, and we're going to go through and talk about them more in detail. Classifications of bones. You got the long ones. Those are great to facilitate movement. We're going to be using a lot of those. You have short bones. Those are great to serve some functions, like shift on each other and glide on each other, like your corporal bones and your dorsal bones are short bones because they can kind of shift and glide. I like to think of it like this. If you were going to jump off of a two-story building for funsies, you'd want to land in sand because that can help dissipate your force. And the grains of sand is like your corporals and your torsals, where they can shift and move and slide and help dissipate that force over some surface area. That's why, like when you're benching a lot of weight, it helps to have these big grains of sand in your wrist to kind of shift and glide and try to dissipate some of that force. Same in our feet when we're jumping and using explosive movements, it's a lot of force. So having these grains of sand that are dorsal bones to help shift and glide and dissipate some of that force is useful. Irregular bones serve like very niche special functions. Like your vertebra are very irregular because they're serving a lot of different jobs. They're stacking up on each other. The way they're foramen, they form foramens. They basically form like tunnels so that your nerves and arteries, and then they got to move, but they can't move too much, but got to move a little bit. So very specialized niche things for our irregulars. And then my favorite are the flat bones. Flat bones serve as protectors, like shields. They also serve as big surface areas for muscles to originate and pull off from. So you think about your scapula serving as like a posterior shield for your back because you can't see behind you. So kind of having this muscle to serve for muscle attachments, but also kind of a shield to protect your organs posteriorly. Ribs are considered flat bones. You think of a big shield kind of in the front. Flat bones up here, flat bones everywhere. Bones come together to form joints. So the articulation of bones form joints. So by that definition, a joint can't just be one bone. Let me see if I could find an analogy. A bottle is the plastic bottle and the plastic cap. And those two separate things form an articulation that can move about each other. So you can open or close. Okay. So our bones articulate to form joints. It's always threes. I love things that have threes. Oh, by the way, we are on page 24. 24. Classification of bones. So you have like hot water, cold water, and warm water. You have three classifications. And so bones and joints are no different. You have three classifications of joints. You have joints that articulate. Sit down. Some people hate this part because it's kind of boring. I'm going to try to not make it boring. Some people love it because it's like, these are the questions that are not confusing. These are the ones you got to get right. These are the 3-foot questions. Three classifications of articulation of bone. And they're classified based off of movement possibilities. Okay. So you think about how states are fused. Like you may go from one state to another state. So an articulation of two states. But it's not like those borders are actually shifting unless you have a puzzle. Right? So you have a border, but it's fused together, fixed. Think about how our skulls are kind of like that, right? Like you have different bones and you have different sutures, like different rivers, but those things fuse up. And the reason they do that is because when we're born, it takes time for our brains and skulls to grow. So our bodies give us time to grow and grow and grow, and then we stop growing, they cement it up, right? Okay. But those are articulation of different bones. It's just there's no movement. Once our bodies weld them shut, okay? I love that because that's synarthrotic, fused bones. For us, synarthrotic bones articulation is going to come in handy for our socket, our acetabulum for our hip, because you have the fusion of the ilium and the ischium and the pubis. You have the fusion of three separate bones that once they finish growing, cement up and form the socket. So not on this test, but on your next test, I may say, how many bones make up the hip joint? And some of you are going to say, well, 2 bones, the ball and the socket. It's like, well, the socket's made up of 3 fused bones. So it's really 4, the femur, the ilium, ischium, and pubis. This is an example, okay? So we have synarthrotic. The next classification is articulation of bone that has more movement than none, but a lot less movement than the most. So not nearly the kind of movement at shoulders and elbows, but a little bit of play. So it's kind of in the middle. It's more than none, but it's less than most. And those are amphiarthritic joints. And I think I have 2 different diagrams where they have the structural classification and the functional classification. So I'm talking about functional. So synarthritic, fused, amphiarthritic, slight, and then the diarthritic, that's the ones that are going to have axes and planes and motions. And so the structural classification for the synarthrotic would be fibrous. There's different kinds, cartilaginous, different kinds, and the synovials. And guys, for this kind of stuff, I'm going to emphasize what you're going to have to know, what you don't have to know. Maybe when you go to dental school, you're going to have to really understand the articulation of the tooth in the jaw. That's cool. I don't have time to talk about that, right? Gumption, all that stuff. Don't know. We're going to do elbows and knees and hips and shoulders, okay? All right. So, slightly movable. Let me give you just some examples of some slightly movables. Like your pelvis has a little bit of play about the pubic symphysis, just a little bit of play. Each vertebra has a little bit of play because of the cartilage, the discs, and the facet joints. Little bit. And then you have the ones that we care about, the ones that we're going to talk about the most. So for your test, all I would ask you to do is know the three main classifications that are on the right side. And they even make an acronym. Coming to 7:30 a.m. class makes you sad. So synarthrodio, infraarthrodio, diarthrodio. And the syn are the articulations, the joints that have no movement. The amphi has a little bit of movement. The dis have the most movement. Those are the ones we're going to talk about in class the most. Okay. So the diarthritic joints. Guys, this is what segues into our lectures before. You can have a uniaxial. Let's think about what that would mean. A joint that can only move about one of its axes. So that means it can only move in one of its planes. One plane, one axis. The hinge on the door would be a uniaxial joint, right? The hinge, the door can only move in one plane, about one axis. I think I asked you this last question, last class, and you got it right. If we have a uniaxial joint, one axis, one plane, how many motions are we going to have to account for? How many different ways can that door open and, oops. It can open and it can close, right? You got to have two motions. Interstate 10 is one road, but I can travel east or west. So if a joint, guys, this is all the time, and on holidays and weekends, if a joint is uniaxial, that means one plane of motion, about one axis, I'm going to have to account for two motions, clockwise and counterclockwise for that joint. Now, we do have different types of uniaxial joints. Some of them are hinge joints. My elbow is a hinge, a door. My knee is a modified hinge. I'm going to get into that for the knee joint about how it's modified a little bit. But we have some uniaxial joints that are like merry-go-round, where their axis is meant to spin in its transverse plane. So like radial ulnar joints. If the door is just a regular hinge, a uniaxial pivot would be like a revolving door. You know what a revolving door is? Where the mass of all those doors stay in the center. It's like a revolving. So this would be like a revolving door. Atlas axis, you guys remember that in Atlas axis is like a revolving door. Atlas axis. Okay. So you're going to have uniaxial joints. The joint can move about one axis. The joint can move about one plane. I need two motions. You're going to have biaxial joints. That means the joint can move about two different axes in two different planes. How many motions are we going to have to account for? 4. Good. That's like saying you're standing in the middle of two roads intersecting. Nobody's there. You're standing in the middle and you're like, whoa, the road can go here and could go there. I got 4 ways I can move. I could go north and south on this one, or I could go east and west on the other. The wrist is an example of a biaxial. It can move about its bilateral axis. It could also move about its anterior posterior axis. I'm just giving you examples. Just giving you practical examples of what we're talking about. Yes, ma'am.
2 planes of motion.
2 planes of motion about 2 axes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. Each plane has to have its own separate axis. That's a really good clarification question. And then finally, we got the one that moves the most. The triaxials. The triaxials. The tri-wizard tournament. That didn't make sense because they had a 4th wizard. It's not fair. So triaxial joints, that's going to be your ball and sockets. I'm just giving you examples, guys. And these are joints that can move in 3 planes, about 3 axes. So how many motions are we going to have to account for? 6, 2 per, right? 2 per. So what we're going to do now is we are going to practice and apply the information that I want you to know with the specific joints that I want you to know. So let's start with cervical. The cervical and the trunk are considered gliding joints, arthrodial bending gliding joints. These joints, let's see how I can put it. They can move in all 3 planes, but it's not because of one fixed point like an elbow. It's the sum total of all a bunch of little. If you take out pocket change every morning, 45 cents, that may get you like 1 grain of coffee. I mean, it's not significant. But if you stack up days and days and days of 45 cents, you might be able to go get you a sweet treat. That's kind of how our cervical vertebrae work, okay? So our cervical vertebrae, the way they stack up. Now, I'm assuming y'all been introduced in anatomy to these vertebrae. And if you haven't, I'll be more than happy to clarify in more detail. I got you for 3 months. So there are some things I'm just assuming you guys had in lab. And I'm here to make some practical sense out of some of these things functionally. So you have these vertebrae, and they're stacked. You got C7 cervical, right? And they can bend, but they can't bend too much because it's like in Ocean's 11 where Matt Damon had to make him like him and forget about him at the same time. They can bend, they can sway, but they can't do it too much because they got to also protect all these vessels and nerves. And so what happens is you have this summation effect where you have significant bending of the structure proper, but it's because of several little bends that stack up. Pocket change that adds up to significant motion. So all of this bending isn't happening in one place. It's the sum total of several little bends that when you stack them up, you can get significant motion. And we can stack frontally. That's not going to be on your first test. We can stack transversely. That's not going to be on your first test. And we can stack sagittally. That's what's on your first test. Okay. Another way to look at it is, anybody used to play with dominoes when they were kiddos? And I used to play, my grandma used to absolutely smash me in dominoes. And so, but I'd say, Mama, I don't want to play no more. I just want to make them, stack them up to drop, make them fall down, right? You'd stack the dominoes and make them fall. What you learn quickly with dominoes is you can't turn, I mean, you're stacking them in a line and that's fun after a while, but then you start trying new stuff and I wanted to make them curve and move in different places, right? I'm a kid, I don't know, so I'm like, well, I want the dominoes to start falling this way, so I'm stacking them, and all of a sudden I turn one 90 degrees, and I'm like, go that way. Doesn't really work. I found that out real quick. But what does work is a little bit of change here, and 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 we're all races. That's how our vertebra work. So in essence, in the sagittal plane, your cervical have a bunch of, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 7, have basically miniature, small bilateral axes that allow a little bit of motion from this one, then a little bit of motion from that one, then a little bit of motion from that one. And the sum total of all those little bits is significant motion. Let's use common sense. If someone you know has fused vertebra, do they have as much range of motion as they had before? Not. That's what it is. So if I take my slinky and I had this motion and I fuse this, I only have this motion. Okay. So for your test, I need you to know that the cervical vertebra can bend in the sagittal plane. The sum total of all those little bits can have significant motion. And landmarks, not global landmarks, local landmarks. When your chin gets closer to your chest, that's getting you more in the fetal. So that's going to be flexion. When your chin gets further away from your chest, that's getting you less in the fetal. So that's extension. Campbell, why don't you use angles? Everybody uses angles. Angles can be very confusing, especially with global and local references. So in other words, if I say flexion is a decrease of an angle, any articulation you have, as you lessen one, you're increasing another. And that can be very confusing depending on the position I'm at. So we're just going to keep it simple. We're literally going to keep it simple. Use local landmarks, which we know, and not get caught up in angles, because again, as you decrease one, you increase the other side. That's how angles work. Okay? Does that make practical sense, guys? Chin closer to chest, flexion. Chin further away from chest, extension. So here are my options. I could be in anatomical position. I can have cervical flexion from anatomical, cervical extension to anatomical, cervical extension from anatomical, cervical flexion to cervical flexion from, extension to extension from. This is not hyperextension, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. That's normal range of motion. Hyperextension is excessive, beyond. Right? But just like hyperflexion, right? Beyond normal range of motion. This is very useful and helpful when you're trying to communicate where does it hurt? Where do you start to have discomfort? You're making notes. You're like, well, it hurts when they extend. Okay, can we get a little more in depth there? Yeah, it hurts when they are flexed 85 degrees and the initial 5 degrees of extension back to anatomical causes pain. Now we can really delve. I know exactly where you're at. That's how we do these things. Extension from, flexion to. And when I say from and to, that's home. That's anatomical home, like Lafayette. Like I went south from, then I went north to, then I went north from, then I went south to, then I went south from. It's no different. No different. Good? All right, let's get to some illusions. It's all fun and games until we get illusions. I need you to be able to, not just, the whole point of how I teach, with passion and energy, is I think anybody can learn this, but not everybody can have the nuance of this. Because if you were taught, well, cervical flexion is when you look down. Always. Here's a fun one. You see what I mean? Like we can't do those things. So did my chin get closer to my chest? Further, closer. Did my chin get any further or closer to my chest? No. So did my cervical vertebra move in its sagittal plane? No. It moved from the room's perspective globally, but we're all moving. The Earth is spinning. For joints to move, it has to be relative to the joint itself. This is not cervical flexion, just as much as this isn't left transverse cervical rotation, just as much as this isn't right lateral cervical bending. What about that? Yes. Let's take a look at a few ways to see that illusion. My chin got further away from my chest. I think you smell what the rock is cooking. If you smell, no wrestling fans. I gotta pick another hobby. What I'm cooking is your brains want to make everything about the room because it's comforting. Your brains want to say flexion, extension, because you want to make it relative to the room. What I'm saying is this moved relative to the room, but it didn't move my neck. This may not have appeared to move relative to the room, and I moved my neck. If I didn't move my neck, I'd be looking down at the ground. I had to have extension in order to keep my eyes level, and we do that all the time. That's one of the really cool roles of our neck is like shocks on a car. As our bodies, you're playing sports, and as your body's taking you all these different places, our neck is like literally like an owl trying to keep our eyes level so that we could process information. Because it's hard to process information like this. So our bodies may want to take our head out of being level, but our necks can compensate to make sure our eyes stay level. Okay. Does everybody understand how this is cervical extension? Maybe looking at it from the side, you see it better. If I froze my neck and came back up, I'd be here. It's the same position. I'm going to teach you, starting now, to learn these things based off of change in position. Motion is change in position. So in the first one, there I am. And in the second one, there I am. Pretty good. Where did you start? Where did you go? So in this case, you'd say, well, he started in anatomical position, but he ended in an extended position. So guys, let's just use common sense, just like roads. You start in Lafayette, you end in Burr Bridge. You know how you had to move to go there. If you start in anatomical and you ended in an extended position, you had to have extension to get there. By the time we get ready for the test, I'm going to prepare you where you don't have to guess. You know. There's no guessing. Where did you start? Where did you finish? So position is super important because motion is made up of position. The change in position is motion. Hashtag high school physics. Change in position is motion. So I'm trying to teach you the process of instead of going right to the movement, which can be very confusing, go to position, which is a lot easier. Where did you start? Where did you go? How did you have to move to get there? All right. Our trunk follows the same rules as our cervical. It's just we don't get as well. That's unfair. If you had a tall skyscraper, has anybody ever been on a tall skyscraper and the wind's blowing and it's swaying? It's kind of freaky. And it has to sway or it's going to crumble down. It's like a big tree needs to be able to sway to dissipate force. So our spine is like a big skyscraper. And the top floors are less dense because they only have to hold up our head. But as we work our way down, there's more and more organs and more muscles and more things. So it makes sense that they're going to get denser and denser at the trade-off of less and less movement. Okay? So for our trunk, we have summation of all of these dominoes, but instead of like 45 cents change, like we're putting like 10 cents. But we have a lot more. But so it's the same concept. But instead of going chin to chest, what I'd like for you to look at is sternum and pubis, pelvis. Sternum and pelvis. If the sternum gets closer to the pelvis, we had trunk flexion. So like think about doing a crunch, getting more in the fetal. Sternum gets further away from pubis, extension, getting further away from feet. Flexed, extended. It's like if you were doing, what's that motion? Is that downward dog or something? No. Happy kitty. What's the yoga pose where like you're like raccoon? What? Yeah. Now raccoon.
Cobra.
Cobra. That makes so much more sense. It's like, wow, even the trash pan isn't getting their own yoga pose. We have actually a family of raccoons, and they're really cute. And possums and skunks. Anyway, so if you're doing the cobra, that's what I'm going to call it, the cobra. So you may do, and look, I'll embarrass myself, and there will be a day where I go down and I'm not coming up. So just call somebody. So if you're like here, right? So your trunk would be like extended relative to anatomical. So that's perfectly okay to say. But again, the reason we don't want to go into angles, because angles can be relative and absolute. And because the joints can move in a lot of different places, and because if I shorten this one, I'm lengthening that one, it's so much easier to just give practical, functional understandings of these movements. Me think so. And then you can save your angles for part of the range of motion. 20 degrees, 30 degrees, 40 degrees. So on your test, let's see. So like you'd have trunk flexion from, it looks like it's moving, and it is. So trunk flexion from anatomical, extension to extension from. But I'm telling you, it's going to get more complicated than that. When we start to incorporate the pelvis, like I'm going to show you, this is trunk flexion. This is trunk extension. Flexion, extension. Similar concept as we did earlier. It's coming. And that's going to be important for you therapists working with pelvic floor exercises, core exercises, working on pelvic tilts. It's going to be important. So I got to show you how that works. Got to show you how that moves. Okay. So trunk flexion, trunk extension, trunk being flexed or trunk being extended. Let's do an easy. Let's go to the elbow, say the shoulder. So the elbow is a uniaxial hinge joint. So that kind of circles back to our earlier lecture about joints. The bones that make up the elbow, does anybody remember those? Where's my favorite one? There he is. There she is. What bone is this? Humerus, outstanding. Which side is it? You know how in lab you were supposed to be able to tell a right from a left? Yeah, a left, good. So guys, we also need to be able to tell, like this is a left. It might be your right, but this is the left humerus, so therefore it's the left shoulder. This is the left ulna. So if this is the left humerus and this is the left ulna, this would be the left elbow. And guys, I'm telling you, I'm going to ask a question literally. I'm playing poker with my cards out, guys. I'm going to literally ask you, what joint is that? And the answers are going to be right elbow, left elbow. And there's going to be people that get it wrong. And I don't want you to get it wrong. I don't want you to amputate the wrong leg. I want you to understand that if we are clear, because everything I teach you that might be unconditional, I'll walk you down a line of, does this make sense? We believe this is true. Well, if this is true and this is true and this is true, well, then this must be true. We were taught in lab that that's the left. For those of you that are watching, I have the skeletons on the screen. We were taught in lab. We were taught in phys lab. You ever heard the name Dr. Alciator mentioned back in the day? She was tough. So don't take my word for it. We were taught that that's a left humerus and that's a left ulna. So why in the world wouldn't be that the left shoulder and the left elbow? That's all I'm saying. It's from the person you're analyzing's perspective. And I'm not going to answer the question. Do you mean you're right or they're right? Because I'm telling you right now, I'm answering it now. I can't give you knowledge on the test. And believe me, after 20 years, I've heard it all, man. Y'all sleuths. Am I on the right track on this line of thinking? I'm just going to quietly say, you're taking the test, not me. I appreciate your question, but you're taking the test, not me. All right? So, elbow, humerus and ulna. Radius and ulna have their own articulation, radial ulna joints. So this is really about how the ulna moves along the humerus, okay? Uniaxial hinge. Awesome. Love uniaxial hinges. So that means one plane of motion, about one axis. What's that plane of motion going to be in? What's the road? Sagittal, frontal, or transverse? Outstanding. So the sagittal road. Well, we know every road I could travel two directions. So here's the sagittal road. My two directions of motion is flexion in the fetal and extension away. Flexions and extensions. And it doesn't matter that my elbow is in a different plane from the room. This is still the outside of my elbow and the inside of my elbow. This is still the bilateral axis of my elbow. The structures don't change. This doesn't become the front of my elbow. It's still the lateral part of my elbow. So this is still my bilateral axis. Flexion, extension, flexion, extension, flexion, extension, flexion, extension. I'm trying to tell you that because so many students want to make everything global. And they want to say, this is flexion, extension, but this is ab and adduction. And I understand the confusion. That's why I'm here to try to weed out that confusion. Okay? So, last part that I want to explain. And on, let's say Friday, on Monday, we'll finish the joints you're going to be responsible for, as well as do a lot of practice. Let's see how I want to tell this story. Lafayette is anatomical position for some joints in my analogies. Meaning Lafayette is very centrally located. You can travel north and south from it. You can travel east and west from it. Okay. So like the wrist anatomical position, Lafayette's a good analogy because I can go to Shreveport from anatomical, or I could go to Morgan City from anatomical. I could go to Lake Charles from anatomical, or I could go to Baton Rouge from anatomical. Not every joint is like that. Some joints, their anatomical position is like in Jacksonville, Florida. Meaning you can't go any further. You can only move in one direction. The elbow is an example of that. The elbow in anatomical position, you can't travel in a direction of extension from anatomical. And guys, what I'm explaining to you is why so many people have a tough understanding of what hyper means. Because most of the things we understand the most are elbows and knees. Head, shoulders, knees, and toes. So the elbow in anatomical position is in an extended position. Only because we can't go any further. That's like saying, well, is Lafayette east or west? Well, it depends. Well, Jacksonville, I know for a fact, is east because there's no town any further east. Does that make sense? The only way you can travel down that interstate is one way. The only way you could travel down the elbow road is one way. And then you could go back. So I think all of this hyper stuff for everything comes from the confusions of the elbows and the knees, which for them in anatomical position, they are extended. So any motion beyond truly is hyper. That's not normal range of motion. Hyperextended elbow, hyperextended knee. But what that does is that says, well, any joint that extends from anatomical must be hyper. No, because not every joint is at the end of its road in anatomical. Does that make a bit of sense? Okay. So, elbow, uniaxial. It's a hinge joint. It's a diarthritic joint. It can move in one plane, about one axis, flexion and extension. Flexion is going to get you in the fetal, extension is going to get you further away from fetal. This is still flexion and extension. This is still flexion and extension. This is still flexion. This is still flexion and extension. Because the elbows, like I did the same thing in all those instances. Good? All right, guys, we're going to keep building. We're going to keep building. We're going to keep working. Oh, if anybody has done the 310 practice, that's what you get with Grace. Grace can help you if you want to go through. Emma. Emma sent out some practice. So that's their job. Their job is to meet with you, answer those questions, and then if there's any clarity, then you come to me if you need. Yes. Yes. Predictions, come up here.
Thank you.
I hope that was helpful.